All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope we can all get settled. Good evening. This is a great-looking crowd. We see a lot of friends out here. Dorothy is already saying, I can't believe this many people showed up, and I know so many of them, and that's great. My name is Bill Lord. I'm with the National Press Club booking team, and we are thrilled and proud to have Dorothy Gilliam with us tonight. Dorothy is part of what we call our Press Club's Newsmaker series. But we have a little bit of a twist on it tonight because usually it's the Press Club that sponsors these events, but we have the Washington Post with us tonight. We're proud to add the Washington Post to our sponsorship. So hello to all our friends from the Post. Hello to all our friends from the Press Club and from everybody else. As many of you know, Dorothy Gilliam was the first black female reporter at the Washington Post in the early 60s during the civil rights era, and she worked there off and on for 35 years. Her new memoir is called Trailblazer, and I honestly think that by the time you finish reading this, you're going to agree with me that calling Dorothy a trailblazer is a vast understatement. When you look at all of her accomplishments and all of the things she's done for so many decades, she has been absolutely transformational, not just in our journalism craft and profession, but for all of America. And I don't want to embarrass you, Dorothy, but you're a phenomenal person. You really are extraordinary. Is that okay? Here to introduce Dorothy tonight is Washington Post reporter Vanessa Williams. Vanessa has carried on many of Dorothy's traditions at the Post. She writes about politics, she writes about race, she writes about gender, and like Dorothy, she is a past president of NABJ, the National Association of Black Journalists. So here's how it will go. Vanessa will introduce Dorothy. Dorothy will speak for a little while about her book and her views of the book. Then Dorothy and I will team up for a Q&A with all of you so we can answer as many questions as we can. And after we're through with all that, Dorothy is going to sign as many books as we can. So that's kind of the lineup. So without any further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Washington Post reporter Vanessa Williams.
So thank you and good evening, everyone. So I'm not going to do the resume, starting out where Dorothy was born here or there. You can read about that in the book. But I did want to, try to put what Dorothy means to me and black journalists and media consumers, if you will, in perspective. If you look at TV these days, you'll see the likes of Nia Malika Henderson, Abby Phillip, and Yamiche Alcindor. And those young women represent the legacy of Dorothy Gilliam. Of course, there are far more people I could name, but again, they're very visible these days because of what they cover. And they're, like I said, they're young women carrying on a tradition. And it can look sometimes like, wow, look at all these, all these black women on TV doing the do. But think about it. It's only been 58 years since Dorothy joined the Post, becoming the first black woman there. I should also point out that the reason I mentioned those three is because they also came through the Post. Nia and Abby were staff writers, and Yamiche was an intern at the Post. And the point is, if not for Dorothy, I think none of us would have been there. We wouldn't be on TV doing the do. So we really do owe her a debt of gratitude for pushing that door in, putting up with all kinds of stuff she'll tell you about, and just making a place for black women at the Washington Post and in journalism. And now more than ever, at the time we're in now, when press freedoms are under assault by certain people, when our very sort of sense of democracy is under assault, it's more important than ever that journalism reflect the values of all people, not just a small group of people that somehow managed to grab the microphone and convince us that we are no longer who we have strived to be from, if not the founding, certainly the many years of struggle by Black people and other communities of color. And Dorothy has always been about that. As a journalist, she made sure to give voice to the voiceless. She made sure to be inclusive in describing what Washington is, what this country is. And as president of the National Association of Black Journalists, she was definitely about diversity in the big tent sense of the word. She was a strong supporter of the unity movement that brought together journalists of color to say to the industry and to the country, look, we have to be prepared for the changes that are coming. We can work together, we can live together, and when we do that, we are stronger. So there are just, so many more stories I could tell, and but Dorothy can tell her own story. She is a gifted writer, a great thinker, a very smart woman, and she's gonna, I'm sure, take us to a little bit of church today. But I do want to, this evening, I do want to say from the bottom of my heart, sincerely, thank you for your service, and we expect you to keep guiding and leading us, because, like I said, now more than ever, we need that strength, we need that unity. Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. That was such a generous introduction. And thank you, Bill Lord. That was a very generous introduction. I was about ready to go and hide when I kept hearing all of that. But first of all, good evening. Good evening to all of you who have come out tonight. This is very special, and I am just very happy to be here. Of course, I have been in the National Press Club many times, but this is a distinguished honor to be here to actually talk about my book, Trailblazer. I should tell you, I did not name my book. One of my daughters, my daughter Leah, named it. It felt a little precocious, but I'm sure, hopefully, it fits. I want to particularly thank the National Press Club and Bill Lord, and also the Washington Post. That's a great honor. There are quite a few Washington Post people here. Would you raise your hand so people can know who's here? Okay. Yes, and alums. Yes, yes, yeah. Oh, on this side? Oh, my goodness. Hi there. Oh, this is wonderful. Thank you so much for coming. It's just a lovely time. And I'm going to speak briefly because, I want us to have time to sign books. I'm not going to tell all the stories in the book because then you won't buy it. But it's a real pleasure to be here. When I thought a little bit about what I could talk about tonight in terms of, the media and my role in it, I really had to pause because, the issues in media are so vast, they're so complex. Even focusing only on media and the civil rights movement or media and the 50s, it's such a huge subject. But I wanted to spend just a few minutes talking a little bit about one of my early assignments that was very memorable to me, but also as one of the early diversity warriors. Vanessa was very generous, but she also has been one of those diversity warriors. I see Evelyn Sue from the Maynard Institute. She's another one of those diversity warriors. So it's not something I've done alone. This is something that I have spoken with a number of people, and they have really, I've worked with a number of people, and together I think we have succeeded in bringing about change. But I was a journalistic witness to one of the, really two of the seminal events of the civil rights movement that really helped to prompt the passage of public accommodations and also voting rights. And these were important pieces of legislation, some of the most important pieces of legislation of the entire 20th century. I got my start in the black press, and I had an opportunity to go and cover Little Rock, the integration of Little Rock, and that I tell a lot of the details of that in my book, so I won't go into it. But my dream had always been to work for a daily newspaper, and that meant a white daily newspaper. There were only one, maybe two black daily newspapers in the country. One was in the South. I did not want to go back south. I was born in the South. I grew up and faced all of those humiliations of white and colored water fountains, the humiliations of not being able to go into restaurants, and I didn't want to go south. So I was very excited about when I heard Dr. Martin Luther King saying to young people of my generation, go into the white corporations and succeed. This is about bringing about change. So I decided to go and get some white credentials, which I needed. Unfortunately, that was part of the sign of the times. When I went to Columbia, I was told, when I not attended, but when I applied to Columbia, I was told that my Lincoln University degree didn't actually give me enough of the liberal arts hours I needed. So I went down to Tuskegee, South, and got some more liberal arts hours, and I enrolled in Columbia in 1960 and graduated in 1961. And one of my most, I won't talk a lot about my days at the Post. I'm sorry, you just have to read the book, but I don't want to spend too much time on it. But I do want to share about, it was tough. It's not easy being first, so I'm going to leave it at that for a bit. But the book starts with coming to the Washington Post. And, but I want to talk a little bit about one of my most memorable experiences, and it was covering the integration of the University of Mississippi. It took place in 1962, and it was when a man named James Meredith had the audacity to say, I will integrate the University of Mississippi. And many of you know about this period, but Mississippi was just a place apart. Mississippi was a place where it was a lynching state. I mean, there's so many people who were lynched. This was the place where a little teenage boy named Emmett Till was actually killed when he was accused of whistling at a white woman. So there was a big team of reporters from the Post, as you can imagine. But I was asked to go after Meredith was finally, on his 5th try, able to get in because he was constantly being stopped by state officials. And I was a little nervous, as you can imagine, about going to Mississippi. But I was glad to do that. Glad to have the assignment. There were many, many harrowing moments getting to Oxford, Mississippi. When I got to Oxford, there were no hotels for black people in 1962 in Oxford. So I found a black funeral home and stayed in there while I was reporting the story. And the person who went with me was a man named Ernest Withers, who kind of knew how to negotiate the South. And that was very, very helpful to me. I was devastated many, many years later when they said he turned out to be an FBI informant. But I think that was that was way after we worked together. And it saddens me, but he was a flawed man, but he was also a person who took care of me and got me in and out of Mississippi alive, and I'm serious about that. Um, but I think about that as being one of my most memorable assignments because it really also, uh, to me, underscores the importance of diversity. The team of white reporters from the Post who went on campus and could circulate on the campus, which I couldn't do, they got one story. I felt really happy to be able to and to be sent to focus on the black community and to find out, what were they feeling. And there was kind of a stereotype of black people as being, fearful and frightened, and there were so many, lies that were told about blacks. But when I talked to the people in Mississippi, what they told me was, yes, it's unsettling when people are getting yanked out of their cars and shot and various things were happening. But they said, we are so proud of him. We couldn't believe that one person would really have the audacity to try to integrate this bastion of white supremacy. And so they just felt not fearful. I'm sure that at some point, some level, there was fear, but their joy that they saw some light, in this situation, was really, really important. And I use that example to contrast what I read about the black people in Mississippi in a book several years later, and they were talking about the integration of Ole Miss and the difficulties, which is too mild a word, of getting James Meredith into the university. When they finally slipped him in on the fifth try, there were mobs of Southerners who were, the whole campus exploded. 2 people were killed that night. One was like an innocent white bystander. The other was a French journalist. But the point is, he got in, he stayed in, and but going out to talk to the community and have the community so excited about, the bravery of this man was incredible. I'm going to kind of skip ahead, and there's so many more things I'd like to share, but I know that I'd like to also have your questions. But one thing I wanted to do is talk a little bit about the continuing importance of diversity in the media. And I really also appreciate the fact that Vanessa really started that exchange, because one of the ways that some of us started responding to the fact that there was an absence of diversity was we started taking action. When I went back to the Post in the 70s, one of the things that really struck me was that there was at least, how would I phrase this in the best way? There were the beginnings of blacks suing, the beginnings of women suing. There was an uproar as people were saying, we want to be respected as human beings. We want to be, women need to be doing much more than work on the women's pages. There was a real uproar. And we used to always hear the editor say, well, we would have more diversity, but we can't find any qualified. And so we said, no. We knew that was not true. And too many people still hear that today. So, but we got busy. And I was one of 8 reporters. And it was an interracial group. Our leader was Robert Maynard. As I said, Evelyn Sue was one of the people who later came on board. But we started a training program so that it was going to be taken from the lexicon of journalism. We can't find any qualified. So we started the Maynard Institute, and that has hundreds of young people have come through the Maynard Institute. The organization still exists, and I'm privileged to still sit on that board. We also started organizations. That's during the mid-'70s. That's when the National Association of Black Journalists was started. And National Association of Hispanic Journalists, National Association of Asian American Journalists, and the Native American Journalists. So our goals were all similar. We wanted to fight for change. And we came together by the thousands at the Unity Convention in 1994. And all those organizations still exist today, still pushing for greater diversity. So we can never hear those words again. We can't find any qualified. But I'm concerned now because the numbers are dropping. The diversity numbers are not increasing, they're dropping. This past year, the American Society of News Editors really couldn't give an accurate picture of how many African Americans there were currently in media. We knew they had been dropping because between 2001 and 2010, there was a 34% drop. But because there have been so many major changes in media, it's a new century journalism now. We really found it very hard to be certain of how many people were there, but many people just didn't bother to answer the American Society of News Editor queries about the race. So they were unable to give an accurate percentage, but we know the numbers have dropped. And so I can't do the journalistic thing and give you total facts on that at the moment, but we couldn't give you the exact percentages because the American Society of News Editors didn't. That's in terms of our legacy media, in terms of print media. As Vanessa said, television has done better, but it still remains a very, very urgent need, especially today. There is, I feel as though Vanessa and I collaborated on our comments here, but when you have a president who attacks the media, as Americans have had to endure for the last 2 years, when you have a president who talks about fake news, and I know how hard journalists work at truth-telling, it's such a destabilizing factor to democracy, not only internally, but worldwide. Because even though we know that, democracy has benefited some groups in America better than others and more than others, we also know that the world looks to the United States as this bastion of democracy. And when that is attacked from the highest level, it really has a destabilizing effect around not just the country but the world. So this is something that I find very troubling, and I know that others find it troubling as well. But I say what is fact, not fake, what is fact is that the media and diversity in the media is needed now more than ever. And I think the post-masthead, which talks about which says that democracy dies in darkness, is extremely accurate and apropos for the times in which we're living. So I want to just close by quickly reminding us. I know everybody in this room knows it, but an inclusive country is a strong country. A country with a diverse and a dynamic use of all of its citizens is an innovative country. And that is a country that is really primed to prosper. Not the kind of polarization that we are dealing with now, the polarization in so many areas of our society. And I'd like to say to our leaders, if they would listen, if you truly want to make America great, don't leave behind the people of color. Don't leave behind the African American youth, Don't leave behind those who are hungry for knowledge, hungry to participate, hungry to work hard to make this a better country. This is there's so many people I meet, and I talk to them, and I've talked to them and worked with them in all the work that I've done with young people in the media, and they are just aching. They are striving for a better life. They want it, and they want a better country. So, I guess I want to add by simply saying there really is a crisis in America right now. I don't think that's news to anyone sitting in this room. There is a crisis. But part of that crisis is a crisis in racial diversity. Part of that crisis is a crisis of inclusiveness. But, somehow I think I still have the faith. That it is not too late to fix the course of our future. Thank you. Thank you. I have 2 new knees, so that's it. I'm not feeble, but my children told me not to mention it, but I don't like to be thought of as feeble. Thank you very much. Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it.
All right, I see green lights. Dorothy, I'm going to start the questioning because I have something that I would like to offer almost as perspective for many of the young people in this room. One of the things that struck me writing the book is you said you were in college the first time you actually stood at a washroom sink next to a white person. And many of the younger people here will find that hard to believe, but it's true. You lived it. My question about all that, though, is when you sit here tonight and look around this room and look where you are, do you say, look how far we've come? Or do you say, why has it taken this long?
No, I actually do say, look how far we've come. But I also say, when you see that you've made progress, why not build on the progress rather than what often happens, and what too often happens, is that we take one step forward and one step backward. I think this is a very different country than it was when I came along, and I came along in the 40s and 50s primarily, and there is no doubt that there has been progress. That's one of the things that I noticed Dr. King always recognized the progress. But the call for when there's progress, what do? Do you stand on it? Because if you stand on it, instead of using that as a chance to go forward, there are going to be forces that pull you backward. And that's what we see happening so often. I think the statement that Dr. King made was, the problem is when good people do nothing. And so much of what is necessary is action. And we all have the potential and the ability, to act on issues rather than to if not passively accept them, not use all of our ability to make a difference, because, we all have that ability.
Right. We'd love to see hands. We'd love to take questions. You're the first one.
Ma'am, wow. Ma'am, it's an honor to be here with you. I would like to know, and I'm not criticizing this at all, I'm just curious. On page 3, you stated that you were expressing your concern that college integration proceed, and you italicized it, slowly. And I'm curious about why that is. I used to cover civil rights and education. So I'm curious about why you felt that way.
Yeah, I think I left the segregated South with a pretty conservative perspective, and the fact that I wrote in my college newspaper that I thought we should let integration go slowly. To me, that seems like a very scary, non-progressive thing to say and think, because we African Americans, by this year, African Americans will have been in the United States 400 years. So, by 1957, a lot had happened, and African Americans had made a lot of contributions to America that we were not ever given credit for. So I thought when I said when I had this conservative idea to go slowly, that was just gradualism. That's the same thing. That was tokenism. That's the way you do nothing but dish out little dabs of what people need instead of opening the doors of opportunity. So that's why I regretted that. Excuse me?
Why did you feel that it should be slow?
Just because I had such a limited perspective at that point. I thought it was something new, something different, and just as when at a certain point the women's movement came forward after the civil rights movement, the women's movement said after Black Power, women's power. It was a time of change. It was a time of change. It was time for old things that had impeded progress to change, and I didn't see that then. I had to learn that more was possible, and I think that's at this point that's something we also have to learn. I think we have to come out of our silos in this country, learn to look at what we have in common, learn to communicate with each other, and go forward. Right now, it's as though everybody is stuck. So.
All right, let me look around. Gentleman in the back.
Thank you. Dorothy, I really don't have a question. I do want to thank you. When I joined the competing newspaper at the Washington Star in 1969, there were very few people I could look up to. I could check in for inspiration. And throughout all those years, you were one of those people. Not only for me, but for a great many people. And I want to thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think very often people don't recognize the pain of not seeing yourself reflected in media. We didn't see ourselves in movies. We didn't see ourselves in television. There's so much, and so when that happens, when somebody is, able to break through and you write about, African Americans or people of color as human beings, people remember that. And thank you, I appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
During your journalistic career, did you ever have a really low point, and how did you survive it?
I had many low points. Yes. Journalism is not easy. It's 24/7 to really do it and do it right and do it well. It's getting so deep into issues that you can write about them and talk about them and share about them. Yeah, there were times when I got depressed. There were times when I had some therapy. I think one of the things that helped me all along was the fact that I had come from such a strong, loving family and such a strong, loving community. I think some of the the Black religious tradition of doing that I came up through. All of that kind of left a sense of hopefulness somehow that you could achieve against the odds, that things were going to change, things were not always going to be the same, and I found that that was a very sense of hope that I always had. But no, there were low periods. I write about a lot of them, and but also joyful periods. But I think what I brought to it was the knowledge that I had something internally that nobody could take away, and that strength really helped. But there were really many moments when one wondered.
What was your experience like writing your book? You're used to interviewing and writing about other people, but what was your experience like writing your own story?
That's a really good question, because that's exactly the way it was. I had been so accustomed to writing about other people. The idea of actually writing about myself was really challenging. And after I didn't get an editor right away. I just kept writing, and then when I finally got an editor, she kept saying, well, how did you feel about this? And how did you feel about that? And of course, as journalists, we don't feel. We try to get the facts, and we try to put them out as straight as we can. Of course, when I became a columnist, things changed. I could have an opinion, and my editors couldn't tell me what to write. So that was a big change. But that was one of the challenges, really, because to really look at myself, and not to go on a giant ego trip, but what can I share that can make a difference? What can I share that could help a younger generation? What can I share that could very well be a stepping stone for somebody? So.
Hello, over here. I too want to thank you for your service and your columns. I read in high school. They were really gave me another way of thinking. I'm wondering though, with the decrease that we find in journalism today, with the just heard about the BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, and I know they're more digital, but still the numbers being decreased. How would you suggest people go about trying to have more diversity? Because I think when the numbers decrease, we're going to see even fewer journalists of color, Asian, African American, Latina, involved in journalism. And I think those stories are still, as you indicated, very important for us to know those stories and be able to share those stories. So I'm concerned about the organization as a whole. Then I'm concerned about the representation of those groups in that organization, because I think then you have someone able to say, well, we had to let 800 go, so why should we hire anybody else who might have a different story to tell? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's a very serious issue. It's hard to come up with just an answer as to how that could be done. I think, some of this is going to just require changes in mindset in terms of coming. I don't see the same potential for perhaps organizing the way we did in, 30 years, but in the 1970s and the 80s and 90s, those organizations still exist, the National Association of Black Journalists, et cetera, and they speak out against this kind of behavior. But I wish I had an answer. I really do. I think the answer part of the answer has to come from those of us who are journalists, who know the importance of journalists, and we know the importance of having accurate media that represents the diversity in the country. But I know the way we did it. That's why I wanted to share that. But it's going to take a kind of a focused effort. I know the Maynard Institute, on whose board I sit now, they're trying so many different ways to focus and to put a light on the issue of diversity. But one of the things that we see happening is that media is reacting to so many other factors in terms of layoffs and buyouts. That's the same thing that happened starting with the recession in 2008, when newspapers were selling properties and offering buyouts, and that's still happening. And part of that is because the whole technological revolution has made everything now very topsy-turvy. But I think that we all have to continue to fight in whatever way we can. One thing is recognizing the power that you, as an individual, that you have. For example, or that as your church group or women's group or some other, you can write letters to the editor. You can let your position be known. Now that we have so many kinds of social media, there can be almost the same kind of things we did that the civil rights movement did. That is, making known what the alternatives are, and making it and finding ways to state the risks that are involved by not having diversity, the risks that are involved when 800 people are laid off, when you don't, and when these various social media, legacy media, all of these things that we have learned to depend on for our news, we need to know that there are ways we can help to strengthen them by just using the power that we have individually and in groups. I wish I had a better answer for you.
Hey, Dorothy. Over here to your right. Hey. I know you were following the Washington Post, and you might have already addressed this question, so I apologize. But when you read the Washington Post on a daily basis or whenever you read it, what are some of the things that make you proud, make you happy? And then what are some of the things that make you cringe?
Well, one of the things, I get the Washington Post, the paper edition, every day. But one of the things that happens when you're writing a book is that you don't read your paper as much as you normally would, because you're focused on the project. But I still smile at those people who are extraordinary writers. One of my favorites is Robin Givhan. I still smile when I see the newspaper taking a stand against the issues in the country. When I went back to the Post, it was just the beginning of Watergate, and it was such an interesting time because the whole paper wasn't involved in Watergate. There was a relatively small number and this great editor, Ben Bradley, but the country was part of rising and saying this is, we've had enough. You know, they just refuse to let Nixon go any further. What I'm finding now is we're not hearing that same kind of outcry. I'm moving away from your question a little bit, but so, you know, when I see the newspaper turn up stories that give us more information about our leaders, that makes me smile. When I see stories that are that tell us about people of color and what they're doing, that maybe the most of the people in the country don't know about, that makes me smile. When I see women who at one point were absolutely ignored, even in the Post, as I said, it was, you know, primarily on the women's pages. When I see women rising and this becoming the age of women, that makes me smile. What makes me cringe, I think, is when those things don't happen. You know, when I don't see enough attention being paid to such things as the mass incarceration of black people. When I don't see those stories being investigated, you know, what tell us about why that's happening. What's going on? How is that impacting this nation? You know, those are the things that make me cringe, because there's so many hidden messages in what happens when you have mass incarceration. There's so many layers of pain and hurt and suffering. So those are the things that make me cringe. Those things that aren't being covered.
Hi, I want to say it's such an honor to hear from you. So my question is on technology that we use today, you know, with the ability to get stories online right away with videos and photos. If you could go back into your career, your early starting in reporting, what is the story that you can think of that you would have chose if you had the chance to get online, have a picture and video, to use it as a piece to motivate people to action, or the conversation piece? Could you pick a story that you would think that would be a good opportunity from the 70s or 60s that you would think?
Well, one of the series that I enjoyed working on the most was George Washington's Mount Vernon, where I learned that the slave cemetery had been totally ignored. It was just as though these people had not existed, and I wrote about it on many occasions, and I think would have been a wonderful story to show visually, and the evolution of it, because it started, you know, quite horribly. And then over the years, as the black women in Virginia got involved, as the Daughters of the American Revolution began to see the light, you know, it turned out that there was a resolution to that issue. And I thought that would have been a good visual story. One of the things that when I look at today in comparison, a parent was telling me that they took their children to Mount Vernon, and they were very concerned that the slave memorial that we worked so hard to get was so small. They thought, you know, it should be bigger, it should be more. So to me, that was a message that the new generation, you know, even brings greater sensitivity to it. But it's not a massive story, but it's a story I think that would have easily shown the power of different people getting involved, communities getting involved, changing the minds of people who once thought that you know, it was not important that the slave memorial, that the slave graves were totally ignored. So that's a quick one. Yeah.
We have one more over here and then another over here, and then we're probably going to wrap this up. So,
hi, Dorothy.
Hi.
You know I'm a Dorothy stalker, but I have a question. I know it's in the book, and I have a book, and I'll read about it. But I want to know if you could just touch on it a little bit. When reporters are about to go out and cover a story now, they make hotel arrangements, flight arrangements, and they go out and take care of business. When you had to do that, what were some of the things that you had to do before you set out to go cover a story? And once you got there, did you follow the green book like that movie is out now, or how exactly was that process for you?
Well, primarily it was because some of the reporters who went before me, some of the black reporters, and when I worked for the black press, we ran into that all the time, where there were no available hotels. I slept in some strange beds, and I've just always been grateful that, because, there were no night stalkers. Because we also had to stay in private homes sometimes. But the Mississippi was the only place I had to stay in a funeral home. But I think I never used the Green Book. And I think by the time, my family came along, there were enough openings that we were able to travel and do things. But in terms of and I have the feeling that I haven't quite answered your question, but in terms of how we planned things back those days, we had to negotiate the South. I had to have somebody with me who would help me negotiate the South, so I wouldn't say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing and wind up dead. I mean, that was the Emmett Till story. In Chicago, nobody had told him you don't do that in Memphis, or you don't do that in Mississippi, rather. And it was such a period of black people have no rights, which white people are bound to respect. That much of what was done was a way of protecting oneself, and I'm sure there were black restaurants. There were, in many ways, black people had some of the same things. They just had less of it, and less money and less power. And you're kind of in a circle where you know what to do. When I worked at Jet Magazine, the word would be, when there's this place has a hotel. This one has a motel. This one doesn't. So you've got to find somebody to help you find a place to sleep. But funeral homes were really popular places to go, and because they kind of knew everything, and most of the time I think they were able to tell you of a decent place where you could sleep. But every now and then you really had to just stay in the funeral home.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. In addition to mass incarceration, what do you think are a couple of other stories that that news media either have underreported or not reported at all because of lack of diversity in the newsrooms?
I think the whole issue of poverty has been, really skirted over. I think in 2017, the percentage of children who got free school lunches was at an all-time high, and that is an indication of poverty. I think the going deeper behind some of the killings, some of the how can I best put it? So often people are afraid to go in neighborhoods east of the river. There's an avoidance, all of that. I think by going into those neighborhoods and really telling the stories of the people and sharing what they have in common with everybody else, I think that's a story that needs to be told. But I think the mass incarceration issue is just such a horrible one. It's so obviously discriminatory to have that percentage of black men jailed. It's just something I think that the news media definitely needs to do much more investigation of. I think maybe that's enough for now.
Dorothy, thank you very much for this extraordinary session. I think everybody here learned a lot, and it was just a great gift that you've given us by coming tonight. And in return, we have a great gift for you. It's this lovely National Press Club coffee mug. And it may seem like a small token, but presidents, cabinet members, famous journalists from all over have received the same cup very happily.
Can I do a quick acknowledgement? My daughter, Dr. Melissa Gilliam, is here from Chicago. Can you wave?
Thank you.
And I want to also thank my publicist who's been helping organize this and helping me get the book out, Julia Wilson. Thank you. There's some other people who are helping me as well, but I won't call them out. Thank you.
All right, I have to do a tiny bit of business. I have to encourage all of you to join the National Press Club if you haven't already. I have to tell you about an event with Jason Razion, who will, is it the 11th of February? He will be here in a similar setting with his book, which should be fascinating. And there was one more thing, but I've forgotten it, so you're off the hook on that. So thank you very much to all of you for coming. It's been a great event. Oh, yes. For those of you who have books or want to get books, Dorothy will be here. Okay, for another half an hour. So we haven't let her go yet. Thank you.